There have been reports that the Korean government plans to include measures aimed at enhancing labor market flexibility in its 3-year economic innovation plan, which will be unveiled sometime this month. The plan is President Park Geun-hye's initiative and focuses on revamping public organizations, streamlining regulations, and nurturing promising industries in the service sector. And the details of that plan are also expected to be made public later this month. For a more in-depth look into this issue, we are joined live in the studio by Dr. Byoung-joo, the head of KL&P Consulting and our regular commentator on this program. Good afternoon to you, Dr. Kim.
Good afternoon.
So this making promotion of labor market flexibility part of its reform agenda, what is the story there?
Well, basically, we remember, quite a while ago, I think it was last month when President had her first press conference ever, and there she laid out different kind of policy agendas that she will be pushing forward. And one of the key things was reforming of the economy. And she also talked about the, normalizing the abnormalities of the society as a whole. And combining those two, right now the government itself is preparing those details about this 3-year plan. And there, as an important part of it was normalizing so-called the abnormalities of the economy. And along with that, of course, there will be some different policy initiatives about the creative economy as well as encouraging or boosting the domestic demand as well. But for the first part, so-called normalizing the abnormalities of the economy, the key agenda, reports are saying, will be doing something about the labor market itself. Actually trying to provide or generate greater flexibility of in the labor market, as well as along with the greater stability. And the government is working on that. And basically what the notion says is that, while there is a polarization going on in the economy as a whole, which creates a greater necessity for the stability for the labor market. At the same time, in order to seek greater stability, we got to make the labor market more flexible. It's a complicated idea. It sounds like a complicated idea, but we can talk about more details.
Right. I mean, this labor market flexibility, the concept, could you try to explain to us what this concept is in simple manner?
Yeah, let's get to the core, parts of the concept itself. By saying making the labor market more flexible, the government is talking about relaxing the job protection that unionized workers in Korea are enjoying at this point, number one. Number two is also relaxing overall wage stickiness. In Korea, well, elsewhere around the world often, what we see is wages tend to go up and continue to go up. And it's very difficult to reduce wage downwards because of the labor contracts and so on. So addressing the job protection itself and then wage stickiness, those are the key ideas about making the labor market flexible as a whole. And this is very important here because the Park government has been trying to introduce various kinds of innovations in the labor market in order to increase jobs. One of the key goals for the government itself is job creation, raising the employment ratio up to 70% from the current level of about 65%. So for that, they have been introducing ideas about how to encourage female labor participants to join the market more, and then allowing the companies and the workers to work based on more of the time basis rather than full-time basis, as well as encouraging the companies to hire more of the high school graduates, and also introducing more flexible hour system. And together with, actually, the court has recently ruled on the base wage issue as well, right? Expanding the boundary of them. And so that's a challenge added on to the initiatives here. And so these are very important initiatives. In order to make these initiatives work, actually, it's absolutely critical to introduce more flexibility in terms of the labor market in those two ideas that I just talked about.
Now, Korea has long been known for its lack of labor market flexibility.
Right.
Now, would it be correct or safe to say that this owes a lot to the nation's modern history?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. There's no question about that. I mean, as we remember during the, for instance, 60s and 70s, of course, Korea's modernization drive began at the beginning of the 60s, and during the 60s and 70s, indeed, a Korean economy relied upon labor-intensive manufacturing of light goods. And at that time, of course, we do know that laborers or workers have sacrificed big time in terms of under the cause of building the nation's economy as a whole. But the thing is, as soon as the 1980s began, there were democratization movement, and at the end of that, workers in Korea realized that it's time for them to, ask for their own shares and asking for stop of old practice of workers sacrificing for the cause of building national economy. So since then, what happened was since the end of 1980s, labor movement, as many of us well know here in Korea, as well as outside Korea know, labor movement has become very strong here in Korea. And there's a perception that Korean labor union has become very strong, especially in the large corporate sector, large size companies. There are strong labor unions, and because of their presence, the wage rate has been going up continuously, and the job protection for those labor organized workers have become very strong. So indeed, Korea, this current situation has owed a lot to the overall historical development.
Now, what are the consequences of this kind of these kind of inflexibility in the labor market? Would you say that it's Korea's economic competitiveness being compromised?
I have to agree with that notion here, because I mean now, as a reality, current reality, we know that Korean companies can no longer compete against other foreign or international competitors based upon the lower labor cost. That's a given fact here as a result of this historical development that I talked about so far. That's number one. Number two is with regard to the foreign investors. There is a growing recognition here that here and around the world that Korea is no longer very attractive in terms of like a labor market conditions. I've heard a lot from some of the foreign executives saying having this kind of wage negotiation, for instance, every year is outrageous in their perspective. They have labor negotiations starting from spring and then continues on until like a late fall. And as soon as new year begin, they have to get into another round of labor negotiations. And foreign executives find it outrageous nonsense. So that's a perception outside. And also, the foreign businesses here in Korea have great trouble in terms of like adjusting their labor force here because of the job protection going on. So it's a huge challenge that Korea faces. And not to mention even the fact, the phenomena here where Korea's leading businesses such as Samsung Electronics and Hyundai Motors, they have moved outside and their protections, and they're producing more cars and more semiconductors overseas.
Now, some experts have said that this will be one of the toughest reforms Korea will ever try to, carry out. Does that mean there are a lot of tough challenges ahead for this country?
Absolutely. What do you call it? The items in terms of like the key items of action that requires policy action. The list is too long here. For instance, let me give you just a few examples. For the extending the retirement age up to age 60. It's critical. It seems to be critical to have the wage peak system here in Korea, but that will face great resistance from the labor union. But that will be a critical step to introduce greater flexibility. And in terms of like a base wage issue here, after the court ruling, we have a list of issues where the labor on one hand and then the management on the other will have to agree on. That will be a long, prolonged process through which, if successful, labor market flexibility will be introduced. And, introducing more different kind of systems to allow greater female work participation in the market, and introducing more of the part-time work system. For those, also labor unions agreements are very critically needed. And that's another front where there will be great conflict between management on one hand and the labor union on the other, and perhaps government on the side as a third party here. So the way I see it, this is a very tough fight or tough process through which this reform will be introduced. Today, after the government announcement or after the reports about the government plan, one example, DUP, Democratic United Party, they issued a statement, and they're saying, well, government is going to try to victimize workers. That's a knee-jerk reaction that we see in politics. And we know with such a political reaction, the overall process ahead will be only very difficult.
Right, and it definitely sounds like each component of this reform agenda will require a lot of effort and a lot of time in order to be successfully carried out. And that, however, all of this seem critical for the Korean economy to advance advance economy.
Right, so we need greater efforts for creating social consensus.
All right, Dr. Kim Byoung-joo, thank you so much for today. We'll talk to you tomorrow.
Okay.